share my screen here. Perfecto. Okay, everybody. Well, like Micah had kicked us off with, I'm very, very excited to chat about all things UGC. We know how important UGC is, especially related to like paid advertising right now and everything else involved. But before I introduce the main man, the man of the hour, I just wanted to start off with just level setting on like why we're here to chat today. And essentially here at Motion, we are the hub for creative strategy. And essentially what that means is we know that so many things have changed, but we know that creatives become the most important lever for success, especially when it comes to paid advertising. But what we also know is that there's almost two sides to the equation. On one hand, we have our performance marketing teams. On the other hand, we have our creative teams. Now, performance marketers are more analytical, data-driven, whereas creative team members might be exactly that, more creative and conceptual. So at Motion, when we talk about creative strategy, we want to help bridge that gap between the two teams. And how we help do that is essentially by making it easier to follow a set number of steps to produce the optimal creative that Micah is going to help us dive into. And at Motion, we make it easy to analyze, visualize, and share these insights to everyone involved. Okay, so that's the high level. Before I introduce Micah officially, I just wanted to cover a couple housekeeping pieces here. So number one is just related to your questions. So I know they're going to pop up, and if you have them, please, please, please throw them into our chat. And something that I like to encourage is like our community knows their stuff. So if you have any answers to questions that come up, also throw your thoughts into the chat. We really want to hear from you. So let's make it happen there. But Mike is also going to be able to share his expertise. And then finally, I know everyone asks, but the recording will be made available after this call. So you'll be able to get it on YouTube through the email if you've registered. Everything, we've got you covered. Perfecto. But now it's time for the main man, the man of the hour, Micah. So Micah and I, as well as his partner Riley, have had a chance to know each other for over a year now. I can't believe that time flies. And I've always been super impressed with their tenacity, approach, and everything in between. So Micah comes from a pretty diverse background, in all honesty. So he started at a company, and he's going to be able to give a little bit more context. But he started at a company as the first marketing hire, where he really dove into the creative side, the content side, and ultimately leading to exit before starting this agency at 0 to 1, where he's going to be diving into UGC. One of the really cool things that I think Micah brings from a perspective is that he actually worked on the brand side. So working with the team to exit is really, really helpful. And bringing that knowledge to the agency end and applying it to so many different brands is something that allows him to excel. But Micah, I feel like I didn't do you justice there. Is there any other context that you'd like to tell the people?
Being on the brand side, Shift was the company first hire. There's being involved in a fast growth, rapidly growing brand like that, and all the different evolutions across the stages of the company. We got to see really the good, bad, and the ugly of agency relationships. Worked with a lot of agencies that didn't work out. They really weren't built for that level of scale that we were working with. And so, don't have an agency background, certainly brand background. I understand that sort of entrepreneurial DNA. And that was opportunity that we saw. I think you mentioned it on your earlier slide. There's this, especially enterprise level companies, there's a disconnect between, often like brand, creative, and growth teams. And if you're on the growth side, it's like really hard to get creative at the speed and the pace that you need to scale your accounts. And on the flip side, brand teams aren't really driven by the same KPIs and don't really understand the power of short-term response. It's more of a longer time horizon. And so getting that done, especially at bigger companies, is really hard. And we didn't find an agency that kind of was suited to kind of be that missing piece between the two. And so that's where 0 to 1 was born and founded. And that's why we focus on what we focus on, but just helping our clients do what we did on the brand side today. And that's done through the power of content.
I love it. Well, welcome to the party, Micah. Can we get some love in the chat? Just some fire emojis, all the good emojis that we can send some love so we can make sure that everyone's feeling welcome. So amazing. Without further ado, what I really want to start diving into is again, UGC is the main topic of conversation, but there's so many parts of this flywheel that ultimately let you get to the ideal UGC pieces. And I think before we dive into parts of these flywheel, I just wanted to get your thoughts on a high level topic, and it might seem basic, but I'm just curious, why is UGC so important in today's landscape?
Well, I was starting to touch on it in that super long intro that I was giving on the how was Q1 treating you, but especially right now, when teams are trying to do more with less. 0 to 1 started as more of a traditional production approach to creative, which is more expensive, longer timelines, and that model isn't really set for success in the paid media landscape. So especially today, when you're trying to do more with less, UGC is the most cost-effective and affordable way to produce creative. That also you can scale with short sort of sprints. And it just happens to be a top performing format, kind of regardless of platform. So if you're not utilizing UGC, you need to be as soon as possible.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Okay. So I know a lot of people are going to want to dive into like, well, how do we actually source creators? How are we creating the right pieces? But something that I'm always curious about is this initial bucket of like our audits and our researching before anything. So what that means is like you're introduced to a brand, you're having that dialogue of even trying to figure out what to do. And this is applicable again on the agency side for someone working in-house, everyone involved. On your end, where are you typically conducting research to start informing the strategy that you're going to build?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different pieces to that equation. I mean, certainly motion. I'll plug motion right now. We introduced motion in a couple different parts of the process. Initially, before you get into name conventions and structures and reporting build outs, you're going to get like a high level look. So we like to connect up the ad account, look at longer timeframes, really to identify top performing, worst performing creatives, any sort of like initial trends that sort of stand out that you can pull insights from and build on top of. So we'll do that. We have a creative strategy framework that's got like common sort of baseline building information where you're going to want to audit past campaigns, key messages, figure out like what your ideal hooks are. You're going to look at reviews, testimonials, press. Like you kind of start with a wide canvas. Competitor research is super important too. Because oftentimes you can see, low-hanging fruit and opportunity area. If there's a certain concept or style that you're not testing and you see that happen across a couple different competitors, it's an indicator that you probably should at least test that and try that. So we'll do all those things. We spend 2 weeks to 30 days at sort of analyzing and building out like an MVP of a creative strategy, initial concepts that we want to test. And then a testing framework, and that also applies to the account structure. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's definitely the secret sauce. It's how you get started. You're going to want to cast a wide net towards the beginning and kind of test a wide variety of concepts. Usually we're starting with like 3 to 5 creators, and each are doing 3 to 5 concepts with the goal of identifying a formula that's going to work, identifying a creator that's going to resonate with your brand you can build on top of month over month, and then concepts that are going to deliver results that you can iterate on. And then you have kind of a jumping off point after that, like a 30 to 60 day testing period. But definitely want to start with a pretty robust analysis across the board of what you're working with.
Love it. And I love that you cast a wide net. I think everybody should. There's so many places you can go, like Micah had mentioned, directly in the ad accounts, just like overall reviews, YouTube pages, Reddit, whatever it might be to get your information. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the pieces that's interesting is like, we can have all this information, but we have to look at it and say like, okay, what are we actually pulling from? And something that you had talked about was, I think it was your recipe builder or your like just creative strategy template that you're thinking about. So I'm wondering, like after you have that wide net cast and you are starting to look for those trends, how are you starting to document that out so you're able to start informing the strategy?
Yeah, I can actually probably pull up a screen share on this.
Perfect. Okay, let me cancel mine out.
Okay, this is an example. This is a template too. Like I'm also game to share out this recipe builder template as like a follow. Let me share my screen.
I know everyone is going to be happy about that. Takeaways are always fun.
Okay, see this here?
We gotcha.
Okay, so what we do, we obviously we're pretty plugged in by running lots of different creatives with creators, thousands over the years. We've got a pretty good sense of like what formulas work. We call it a recipe, lots of ingredients. We treat sort of a concept as a collection of ingredients that you can sort of play with and dial up and dial back. But there are concepts that work, that are tried and true, that we sort of collect over time, stuff that bubbles to the surface is like cross-category formats that, we can utilize regardless of client. And so over time, as things perform, we'll test new things, but we'll collect those. And this is the recipe builder sort of template. We'll start to like house them. So like, hook problem solution or before or after. This is a recipe. So we'll get an example of this. We know this works cross clients. And so we'll have this as almost like a base. And so when we're onboarding with a new client, we have a set of these, probably like 10 to 15, like tried and true. If you do not have these in your account and you've not tested these, this is probably a good place to start. You pair that with your creative strategy and your key messaging, you kind of can tailor it a bit to the brand. But certainly want to collect these over time. We do this through client work, but also just through making sure we're plugged into the industry. It's a daily, it's called a must conquer daily for our team, but every day they're going into the TikTok top ads where you can discover and filter by, performance. We're looking at competitors, other agencies in the space. There's a couple of key voices that are active on Twitter that will talk about this stuff. And every day we'll go in and sort of canvas the landscape. And if we see a concept that kind of checks all the boxes that we want to test, and we'll go ahead and implement that with the client. And then if it resonates, we'll add that to our recipe builder. So this is a collection that is built over time that we use for all of our clients, but you could certainly do this in-house as well. But this is, we've also, we'll collect visual hooks, as we're researching every day, something will pop up. We will record that, drop it here. You can even categorize this by category, but this gives you a reference point as you're looking to iterate into the future and build new concepts.
I love it. I love it. So basically, just to give everyone a high level summary, like these are not only research based related to like the brands that you might be working with. Of course, that exists in this equation, but what you're also doing is just making sure that you have a finger on the pulse. So it's TikTok top ads, like all over the place. You would say, what are these trends and how should we test them? Do I got it correct?
Yep.
I love it. I love it. Perfect. So once you have your research, that brings you to a place of like having an idea of what you want to do. I think one of the big things that I think about next is when we talk about like UGC itself, the very first thing is just starting to think about the creators that you're working with. Now, there's a million different ways that we can take this. If I'm not starting in the right place, if there's more context that you can't share, please, please, please let me know. But I think the first question that I have for you is related to sourcing on that end. So on your end, how many creators are ideal? And then how are you finding those creators to put together and match the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how many is ideal is really a question that's answered after you have benchmarks. You can calculate there's some ways you can look at like average spend per creator and a target spend in the account. We do that with motion, where we'll look at if they have like sort of a baseline, we'll look at, say the average is $1,000 spent per ad. They're looking to spend 10K or 50K or 100K. You can sort of extrapolate a number of creators you need to test, and then back out a number of creators from there. Most typically it's like 3 to 5 creators per month in a sprint, and each of those creators developing 3 to 5 concepts, which especially early on when you're kind of trying to build that baseline where you're testing a little bit wider, you're going to want to do that to figure out, okay, of the 3 to 5 creators, here are the 2 that really resonate with the brand that are going to perform well that we can build on over time. Maybe you cut the losers and add a net new as part of like an iterative process going forward. And then same thing with the concepts. You're identifying winning concepts that you can match with future net new creators that are resonating with the brand, and kind of vice versa. In terms of where you source them. So it kind of depends on the goal of the campaign, the brand, the product. There's different buckets. There's the influencers or micro influencers, which is, they're going to be a benefit if you're looking to borrow their level of expertise, their credibility. If you're trying to whitelist or run Spark ads, like that's all kind of a realm that you could play in there. There's also the UGC creators. We're most often playing with UGC creators who are going to be great at executing a brief. They understand sort of the mechanics of performance and how to translate that to their creative. And then actors is another that we've been playing with a lot. More and more traditional actors are getting more into UGC content creation. They're going to be really good at executing a script and delivering it in an authentic and relatable way and being a little bit more diverse, but not so good on the content side. So depending on what bucket you need to focus on, will also determine the level of hand-holding and relationship in the briefing process required for those. But in terms of identifying them, finding them, you've got, of course, you got the platforms like, Grin, Creator IQ, et cetera. I don't like those as much. I mean, they're good for the discovery, but oftentimes you're kind of working through their CRM and so getting responses can be hard. You're trying to build a relationship with them at the end of the day. So it's a good starting place, especially if you have one. But you can be a lot more scrappy than that. I think, we'll, depending on the approach, like the creator marketplace on TikTok we've had a lot of success there. There's communities on Twitter, like the UGC community. If you do a post around some hashtags, like you can have people almost do a casting call and have people opt in and have a wide base to sort of audit and select from. You can even push them to more of a funnel where they are self-selecting and giving you some information to choose from. So we'll do that. Search for hashtags, and particularly if it's like a really niche brand, that may be appropriate. You can do that as well through just like DM and cold outbound email. To do that well, it needs to be conversation based. So avoid like giving them the whole nut up front. Just like, start a conversation, give them a personal compliment, build that relationship, and then work with them time. I think the goal with any creator, we found success in building longer term relationships, as opposed to kind of starting fresh, new list every time. Like you want to, over time, figure out which creator is going to work with you and refine that process with them, and they'll get better at delivering the content. They'll understand the brand better. They'll develop a brand love. And so you can kind of even start to give them a little bit more creative liberties as that relationship progresses. So that's always our North Star. Always trying to find really level 10 creators that we can work with again and again and again. We've got our own creator community that we've built, and have given them a path to becoming a preferred creator. So if you opt into our network and become a preferred creator, there's a little bit of training that's involved, and then they get access to like basically top deals. And when we have a brand comes in, we'll offer it to them first. They get some training, we work with them over time, and they just become an all-star creator for us. That's a go-to. So it's a little bit of a win-win. And on the brand side, you can do this through building that like affiliate or creator affiliate or ambassador style community. Again, you're just building relationships where they fall in love with your brand and identifying different opportunities and ways you can leverage them. But certainly, I think having long-term relationships with the creators is a good focus.
So that makes a ton of sense. And I think like everything you've mentioned, from being able to have long-term relationships to not only relying on tech platforms to build out your creator network, but also like doing the legwork on your own is super important. Yeah. To take one step back really quickly, if we were to like apply this to a specific brand, in your mind, you've done some research to figure out persona, like what's worked and that kind of stuff. Does that information at all inform the type of creator that you're going to try and source? So whether it be like demographic characteristics, geographic characteristics, like stuff like that?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I think the number one thing that we look for, I mean, initially you're probably going to identify a couple of target verticals. This is done by demographics. It's a test and learn approach. So you're going to try to figure out who resonates, how well they're successful, et cetera. But like the number one metric we look for is how well they can create content. So definitely spending the time on the front end to make sure that they can deliver video content that's high quality. They can speak to camera, that they're relatable and authentic. And that working relationship, they're able to deliver content to you on time, they're responsive. All that will go a lot further, because at the end of the day, especially for performance creative, when you're not asking them to just promote you, you're wanting them to execute content that's pretty specific to a brief. And so their ability to sort of follow that brief and give you what you need is very important, and why it's important to like identify the people who can do that and then build with them over time.
So let's speak to the creator audience a little bit here. So you're doing a lot of the work to try and jump into those communities and find the right people. What makes somebody stand out as like a 10 out of 10 creator that you'd want to reach out to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like I said, we're looking at their ability to create really engaging content. Like it's giving them a script or not, like they're going to have to deliver something that is relatable, organic, feels believable. That's how it's going to drive results. And so they have to be good at executing that. So we're looking for that always. We'll search, by hashtags, by demographics, et cetera, but we'll almost rank a tier list and say like they're a match demographically, but also their content quality is really good. We'll start the outreach process and then go from there.
Love it. Love it. And then now let's speak to the business side. I'm going to have a couple questions there, but even Gabby, I saw had a question in the chat mentioning like, you might have a very specific demographic that you're looking for. And being that, whether it be senior or elderly, something along those lines might be a little bit harder to find. Have you been able to crack the code to be able to search for like unique, I won't say unique, but specific demos like that?
Yeah. I think, a lot of times, and if you're looking for something as unique as like an older demographic, the UGC community, maybe not a good fit. We've experienced some success by finding actors, and you can search, there's communities for that. There's even a couple platforms where it's like casting platforms that I think is built more traditional approach to finding talent, but more and more the actor community is getting involved with content creation in UGC. And you can sort of, especially if you have a long-term relationship with them, you can almost match like traditional demographics. You know that they can deliver a script, they can talk to camera, and so you can coach them on the content side. And we're not most often, we're not leaning into the creator themselves to deliver the final like ad ready video. We're working with them to develop a library of creatives. So if we have a brief, it's going to have a couple of like hero concepts with some scripts or talking points. It'll have multiple options of the hook and the CTA, which is lines they'll give, and then like a B-roll shot list and some visual hooks with some examples. And they're just executing kind of down the line on all the different, you know, ingredients to the recipe, so to speak. They'll give us that basket of assets, and then our team ingests that and will cut up the pieces of the ad ready creative. So you actually don't need them to be able to edit the content if you take that approach, which unlocks the ability to work with someone like an actor that may be more like specific to a demographic.
So what I really like about you at the same time is like you're a problem solver at the end of the day. Because even if it, let's say, even if it is that elderly audience or like senior audience that you're looking for, like you're going to try your best to be able to try and find them in the UGC side. But if it's like, we got to move and we got to find someone, what are alternatives? It's like, that's the actor route.
We've even worked on set for UGC style productions. Like, and if you're looking for that and you have, say, a videographer on team or a contract videographer, you could find a local actor who fits that demo and be on set with them and help them execute the UGC in a more traditional production framework, but is still aligned with this style. So there's lots of ways, like you said, it's problem solving. Sometimes you got to kind of roll up your sleeves and figure it out. But there's definitely ways to get that done.
Love it. Okay. And then on your end, there's so many, to speak more to the creator side, less the actor side. When you are trying to find all those creators, this can turn into a boatload of work at the end of the day. Like it just turns into who are we reaching out to? Who's the right fit in that type of conversation? So how are you typically managing that reach out process to specific creators?
Yeah, well, I mentioned there's a couple ways. I mean, if we're doing cold outbound, that's DMs and emails. You can get like, there's kind of, you almost need to take an iterative approach to what's going to start the conversations the best. So playing with things like subject lines is really important. First lines, you're going to want to customize and personalize those. So it's simple framework for that. I mean, it's just like, hey, Evan, I saw a recent post on X with X brand. Really loved it. I think you're an amazing creator. I would love to talk to you about this partnership with X brand. I think you'd be a great fit. You just want to open up the conversation. And so that gets better results in saying, hey, I am Micah from X brand, and here is this whole campaign detail in a message. That's a quick way to not get a response or get like a really high rate, because you're getting them on their heels right from the get-go. So just start that conversation in a really organic, kind of true to platform way if you're doing the cold outbound. Now, oftentimes I mentioned the creator network. So what we do is try to build those relationships, get them into our creator network. There's, we're leading with value, giving them value to join that. So it's like giving them preferred deals to brands, giving them education, working with their leadership team, helping them get better at their skill. And then through that, we've got a qualified network of creators that we know are going to be high performing. They're trained on our style, and we can easily go recruit them quickly, like on a dime when we have a brand come to us or a campaign that comes to us, because we already have that relationship established. So that's oftentimes, especially now, what we're doing more of than sort of the cold outreach. But there are instances with brands where it's like a unique targeting or a unique angle that we have to go sort of that cold outbound route, which is just a little bit longer of a cycle. So you can do both, but definitely try to bring them from cold outbound sort of initial connection to like a community that you're building over time.
That's where it really clicks. This is like, we want you to be a part of this community, the collective, and start to make it work on that front. Now, long-term relationships, being able to establish those, there's so many different factors that allow them to be successful in the long term, right? It's just like the quality of the content. It is like the motivation of the people involved. It's the actual products that they're featuring. That list continues on. So something that I'm always curious about is, in your world, how do you keep the creators you work with motivated and like producing that great content?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different from an agency standpoint versus a brand. From an agency standpoint, it's about plugging them to deals with brands they want to work with. And then from our perspective of being creative strategists and growth marketers, helping them refine what they do. And then making that process really simple and easy to work with and streamlined. And so they get a lot of value out of working with us, as well as connections to new opportunities. And then the community, being connected to the community of other like-minded creators. So that's a different approach. We sort of own and nurture that community. But on the other side, for the brands, really you're trying to build a almost like a brand army, a community of advocates that love your brand. So I think it can start with a lot of times I've seen success with just seeding product without like a deliverable, so to speak. Like if you're leading with the deliverable and the request, then that just kind of starts relationship in a certain way. So if you want to start kind of wide and gift your product out as like adding value to them first, the data shows that most of those creators will post organically. And then from there, you can identify, okay, this one was great. They really love the brand. I can tell they can make good video content. And that's a good jumping off point for a conversation. You can ask to license the content they posted organically or engage them for a more formal campaign. So that's one way to go about it. But working with them to make sure that process is easy, celebrating the wins. If you get like a campaign that does really well, let them know, kind of let them into the metrics, give them a case study, and then use that to continually go back to them and just keep them a part of that community, keep them fed with new opportunities. That's the best way to go about that.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And I think like just for my own curiosity here, you know how you had mentioned the actors, and with actors, it's like, give me those raw videos. We can edit it. We can stitch them together the way that they're required. Yeah. On the other side, with the creators that you work with, do you have that same like expectation where it's just like raw files, cool, we'll do what we need?
Oh, we do.
Cool.
Yeah, typically. And I mean, there's exceptions to that. That's an important piece of our process because we've got a more iterative approach where like, we don't think a video should be made once, for example. Like a simple change on the first 3 seconds can 10x the results. And so you need that ability to create iterations from the content. So if you're leaning as a creator to produce that, you know, then you're getting into deliverables and you price per deliverable and it's more difficult and you're more limited. So getting that library of assets, you have to put the kind of the planning and the creative strategy into that process to know what you need. But oftentimes we'll get enough content to develop multiple concepts out of that library. And we have that knowledge going into what the ask is. And on the back end, we can do, 5 different concepts from a library they deliver, but also we're pre-recording like multiple options of the hook. And so we may test, a couple versions of the hook, but we've got a bank to go back to. So if we hit a winning concept that scales really well, or a creator that has a winning concept that scales really well, we can go backwards and swap that first 3 seconds, maybe change the structure, and we can double down on the success of that ad because we're able to scale it because we've got sort of the ammunition to be able to do that from the beginning. That's most often like how we're approaching it. Now there's instances where like if it's more of an organic play where you're focused only on whitelisting or Spark, like you may not need to take that approach, or if they're doing an organic only campaign, or if you have a relationship with a creator that you've built over time that knows exactly what you're looking for and knows the style and the strategy behind it because you've done this 8 times with them, we'll start to give them creative liberty to sort of make some of those own calls, especially if they understand your brand really well and it connects to their life in a way that's like it's kind of an authentic place. We'll allow them to kind of develop their own concepts and almost pitch back to us. But that kind of comes with them having a good connection to your brand.
Love it. Okay. Well, 2 big things really stood out to me in terms of buckets, and I want to explore both a little bit. But on the first side, like when we're talking about that motivation, there's so many different elements of like how to keep them motivated that I have a question related to. And then the second thing that I'll follow up with is more so diving into like the briefing side of things. So how are we making sure that we're translating insights that we have into the ask appropriately? But starting off on the motivation side, and I've seen a bunch of questions roll in here. Now, please don't feel pressured to share directly what 0 to 1 does, but more specifically in your experience, what you've seen across the board in terms of like compensation approaches. You had talked about like how it's per deliverable in certain instances. You've talked about like raw asset files and stuff coming there. What's like the wide gambit of different options you've seen on that comp front?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly relationship driven is the way it needs to be, and sort of giving value first. And that opens up some flexibility when it's done in a way where you're kind of a focus there to where you can take it case by case. But I mean, oftentimes we're trying to get licensing on the front end wherever possible, like include that in the arrangement. That's like a non-negotiable. Now, sometimes they push back and you got to figure out a term, and all that's doable, but we like to start with open licensing because that's what supports our iterative approach. That, and then Spark whitelisting access, you want to get that included, and then getting the raw content is always in that front ask. And depending on which community you're focusing on, whether it's UGC creators or actors or influencers, the ability to sort of get that ask complete, will vary. And it's certainly driven by how good of a relationship you have with them and how much value you bring to them. So it's something you figure out on a case-by-case basis, but definitely try on the front end to get all the different pieces that you need to get success. And then celebrate that success back to them. So they see it, they get a case study, they're building a good relationship with the brand, and then it sort of makes sense and clicks. But there's, it's all done in the context of conversation and getting to know them over time.
Entirely. Okay. And then moving to my second bucket that I have here, just related to, we have all of this information. How do we translate an ask over to the exact creator or the actor that we're working with? So on your end, what does that translation layer look like? What does that briefing process look like when you're taking them through that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll show you some, but we've gone through different approaches to briefing. Briefing is the secret sauce. It's how you get what you need. And the trick is creators have a different ability to execute a brief based on who they are, based on their skill sets, based on what type of creator they are. So there's not a one size fits all approach. We've gone back and forth from decks to Google Docs to really prescriptive scripts to script formulas to talking points. And there's no one size fits all approach. I think the most important thing here is to be relationship driven and get to know the creator, because they'll often tell you how they need to be reached out. And there's definitely some creator can deliver a script to a T in a really relatable way, and they prefer to have a script. Other creators will be really tripped up by a script and it will come across as canned. And you're not going to know, the same approach doesn't apply to all. You've got to get to know that creator to understand how they need to work, and then adjust appropriately so that you're getting the best content. So we've had, I'll show you a different sort of formats. Let me share my screen again. One sec. Okay. Sorry. Okay, see my screen here?
Yep, we got it.
This is a creative brief from one of our clients. This one's obviously, it's pretty visual in how we're instructing them. It gives information on funnel placement. This is a more prescriptive, almost like a script format with a visual example. We've had some success with this. This type of approach leaves some information to be interpreted. And then there's other instances where, and most often now, well, I'll show you another example of a deck. Here's another one, more visual, leaving them some room to sort of fill in their information or how they want to execute this. So it's more just like creator notes and a link and maybe some hooks and some examples with inspiration. But more and more, we call it a creator manual. And I've got a template for this too, if anyone wants to follow up and get access to a template. But this type of approach where we're over communicating, giving them more information, we found success with when you pair it with a relationship or a call or a Loom recording that walks them through it. Giving a creator a giant, document is probably going to be overwhelming and not give what you need. But on the flip side, giving them a really streamlined deck that leaves a lot of room for interpretation may also not get what you need. So this type of approach where you're giving a manual, you're giving the overview of the brand, you're giving links to inspo, giving them all the key talking points, kind of the backstory behind it, the USPs, but then more specifically, we've got shooting tips and requirements. And then you get into the concepts where you give an overview, multiple options of the hook, instructions on how to execute that. This one's got a very prescriptive script where we want them to inject sort of their own vibe into it. Multiple options to the CTA. This is that variable testing that we're able to do with this, and the B-roll shot list where you give specific visual examples. This one here, this dice drop is actually one of our creative strategists actually executed this at home. So oftentimes working with the brand, we'll get them to send us the product right to our creative strategist, who will then play around in the briefing process and actually make some of these shots to then communicate over to the creator. And we'll add visual examples here of every, most often the B-roll shot. Sometimes it's a little bit of a spray and pray. We give them some creative liberties, but other times there's visual hooks that you specifically want in the creative that you'll need to give examples to. So that's how we accomplish that. Sometimes you can find examples on TikTok that you use as inspiration too. So it's kind of a balance as to how you want to go about that. But then the most important part of this is making sure you're taking the time to understand the creator, how they want to create, how they, communicate, taking the time to get on a call with them, walk them through this process, make sure they understand what to do, what not to do, and have any room to ask questions and make sure everything is really clear. If you don't have time to do that, then a Loom recording where you kind of walk through and present this, call out things like, okay, this script right here, like this is an example. If you are good with the script, feel free to use this. Feel free to put this in your own words. The number one goal here is to make it authentic and relatable. So if you need to do your own script, do a second version where it's just off the cuff, like feel free to do that. You're able to sort of communicate the in-between details that you need to, that's going to set them up for success on either a call or a Loom recording. But we like to give them more information they need and really clear direction and the room to give us feedback and dialogue.
I love it. The context to truly know a brand is so empowering at the end of the day, right? It's just like when you know what the brand is actually about, what you're actually like putting yourself behind, so much easier for you to tell that story a little bit more authentically, at least what I find more than anything. Yeah. One of the last pieces that I'm curious about, just to like hit it nail over the head, is like we talk about, I know there's not one solution, but there's almost this like sliding scale that occurs where it's on one end, it's like no template, just give them the no script, just give them all the context they create comes to life. And on the other hand, we have like, here's the script to a T, follow that thing, give me what I need type of deal. And where it seems, let me know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but where it seems like you play quite a bit is like sliding it somewhere into the middle. It's like, these are options that you could talk to, but if you don't like those options, speak to it this way. Is that the truth? Or are there instances where you actually are being super prescriptive? It has to be this way more than anything.
I think it's a sliding scale. I mean, there's certain things that you want to be prescriptive on, like, for example, a hook. Oftentimes, creator is, you say hook, they may not even understand really what you're saying. Being an influencer or content creator, or what the mechanics of that is, or why it's important. So I think prescribing things like that, where you're being pretty thoughtful, and then with the visual hook, you've got 3 seconds to hook them. So making sure that is prescribed, but then maybe in the script, you're giving them key brand messages and are trying to really relate it back to their personal story. So it's definitely a sliding scale. But again, like you're kind of, your amount of being prescriptive is kind of driven by both opportunity and then the relationship with the creator too. So I've been all over that spectrum and find success with all of it. This is just what we found works most consistently for our approach to that iterative kind of rapid testing process.
I love it. And speaking to those hooks, how many hooks are you typically having creators shoot for you in a single ask?
Yeah. Again, sliding scale. Even this week, we're talking about how many hooks we want to have in the brief versus not. We've done a ton, and we've also had conversations that maybe we should just prescribe 3. I think right now we are looking more towards 3, 3 options, because we have like a 30-day cycle. And so like, we're not gonna be able to test that many hooks in that time period. So it's more about getting an A and a B and then a backup to iterate. And then from there, you're kind of on to your next sprint. So being really clear and being thoughtful about what hooks you're creating. So spending the time to make sure that those are really good. Looking at, there's resources like TikTok trends, you can get top performing hooks, and you got a spreadsheet of 100 of them. So like making sure you're kind of picking and doing that thoughtfully, and then pairing that with a visual hook that's going to be really thumb stopping in that first 3 seconds, getting them to execute that. And then when you're running the test in the account, you're probably going to just have a variation on a single concept. And then you've got a backlog, an extra hook. If this concept works, you can do an additional test and kind of scale that creative even further.
Entirely. Okay. Well, Micah, up until this point, like we've conducted our research to learn about the brands and like the USPs, the personas and everything in between. We've sourced creators, we've found the right ones, we've briefed them. To tie a bow on this section of it, the last question that I have is for someone who manages this process every single day. from the moment of like briefing a creator to actually having that final version that you'd feel comfortable going live with, how long can people expect that process to take?
Yeah, well, it can take a couple weeks, it could also take less. We're having to figure out internally how to really consolidate that time frame, because being like a new TikTok partner, we've got like a 10 to 14 day turnaround from like contract signed to like deliverable. So there's a different pieces of that process that can take, like creator outreach, that getting a response when you're doing cold outbound, that process alone can take time. But if you've got a creator community that you've already invested in and built, that process is really quick. So if you've got that community and that creator already dialed up, like, and they know that they need to deliver content within 5 days after receiving the brief, like you could get content within a week and then ingest that content, deliver around 1-2 days later. So it's really about finding efficiencies throughout that process and kind of doing that, over time. But if you're starting out fresh, I would give yourself minimum 2 weeks to 30 days to kind of go through that first process, start to get content back and get it out in the wild.
It's so cool because each one of those steps you can actually dissect. Like even that outreach, how you mentioned it takes a couple of weeks. It's like, okay, well, mentally I'm prepared for that. I know that. It's like community is going to take longer, but like 2 weeks here. And then as you work your way, if we call it a funnel, for lack of better terms, you can start to say like, okay, we've provided a brief. How long does it actually take to produce the asset at that point? Because once we're able to see, okay, it took really long. Why did it take really long? Is it the creator's ability? Is it the brief that I had provided? How do we start to dissect what's going down there?
100%. And usually the process that takes the longest is if you build the brief in the way I just showed, where you've got all the different pieces, creating the content of the asset is really quick because you've already sort of pre-produced the output. So it's basically assembling the different ingredients to a recipe. We could do that in 24 hours to get a V1. So that's really quick, but it's like the back and forth with the creator and making sure you're getting the content in the right way, that all the different like brush strokes for your picture you're making are there and in place. And then any sort of feedback rounds that you have with them. So initially it takes a little bit longer, especially when you're doing the cold outbound, cold outreach and starting from a new relationship. But as you work again and again with the creator, that process gets consolidated because they know exactly what you're looking for and you've got that relationship already established. So it can get pretty quick.
I love it. And I don't know if it's possible, but now I'm just again curious, like, do you have any anecdotal like timelines around first time you're working with a creator? Let's assume that all of that cold outreach has been completed. We're now in completion phase where it's like they're building or they're making and shooting an actual asset. How long should someone expect that process to take? Because what I'm really trying to get to is like, do good creators actually grasp it faster, produce it faster? Is that actually a measurement of success? Or talk to people through that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it is. I think part of it's setting the expectation on the front end. So if you give them 2 weeks, they're going to take 2 weeks. If you give them, hey, we need this in 5 days, that they'll do that. So I think it's part of it's expectation setting. Part of it's the product. Like sometimes, like for example, one of our clients is ClickUp. There's a whole level of product knowledge that has to go into place. And we may do like a training and set up for a custom ClickUp board and make sure they understand the product, or like landing another one of our clients. They have to move into an apartment and like create the content. So that there's a factor there too, of just like product knowledge and getting up to speed. But, I think certainly, we say 5 days, like 5-day turnaround. Once you receive brief, we want the content within 5 days. And that's assuming all the sort of pre-work, has been done at that point.
Of course. And flexibility just baked into
and
those
then sometimes
relationships like you talk about.
Too. Sometimes that they're on a trip and they can't get to it or whatever. So it's give and take, but 5 days is our benchmark.
Let's not forget to be human, everybody. We have the numbers to back it up to make sure we work towards, but we're all humans at the same time. Micah, we're coming up on the final 12 minutes here. So anyone who's in attendance, if you have those questions, please get them in. I have a couple more that come to my mind. And now we've come to a place where that asset's created and we've launched it out into the world and we're starting to collect some data. Now, you've talked about iterating quite a bit starting at the beginning of this conversation. I'm wondering if you can talk people through your iteration process, things like how are you approaching it? When do you start to look at the data? Honestly, anything that you're willing to shed insight into. Would that be okay?
I mean, yeah, for sure. So being on the creative development, our cycles are, we do 30-day sprints, usually 30-day cycles. So That's kind of the time frame. It's a little bit longer versus like if you're an actual media buyer, you may be looking on, weekly or just shorter time frames to make buying decisions. We're looking at those 30-day cycles because the creative cycle itself is about 30 days. And so we kind of need those broader strokes. Within a couple weeks, like we're certainly like 2 weeks into a creative being live, like we're in our Motion account and like we're looking at results and trying to pull insights, but we'll do a 30-day look back. And everybody loves like the ROAS metrics. It's not really a lever that you can pull. We'll use that as an indicator of success, of a concept or a creator. But the looking at like the important but uncommon metrics like thumb stop ratio or click to purchase ratio, a lot of stuff you get inside Motion, watch time, like that stuff that's what we'll look at to dissect a piece of creative itself once we identify a trend. So we'll say, hey, this creator in this piece of creative, like the thumb stop ratio was 45%. It was incredible. Was it standing out amongst the others? And so like we'll look at that, dissect the hook, the first 3 seconds, and figure out, is there anything in here that we can apply to our next 30-day sprint? And so we'll say, okay, this first 3 seconds, we did this shot and this was the hook. So for the next round, we'll take our winning creators and make sure they're getting that hook, for the next concept or a version of that hook, or kind of build on top of that. And then when we bring in net new creators for that next creator sprint, we'll apply that to those future briefs. So, and then you kind of dissect like 30-day thumb stop ratio, click to purchase ratio, which is more of an indicator of like how well a message resonated with an audience, how well the CTA was, click-through rate, watch time, how well we engaged them. And then there's like funnel metrics too that, kind of will allow us to make recommendations that ultimately impact our success, like on the landing page and the funnel. But yeah, 30-day sprints, we'll pull insights, apply those to new concepts, kind of rinse, repeat.
Love it. One of the things that I like that you and the team really take into consideration is that you're focused not only on the variations, so upfront working with the creators to get what you need to put it out into the world, but then iterations to be able to say, like, we have data, what should we actually do rooted in data? So like the test and learn approach that I've seen, well, the slide helps, but I've seen you, or I've heard you talk about, is super helpful to take both into consideration. Cool. One of the questions that's come up, which I think aligns with like the iteration process, is we can talk about creative all day, every day from start to finish, right? But the other piece of this that comes to play here is the landing page experience of where you're ultimately driving people to, right? So there is a specific question saying like with UGC, is there a different experience that you've seen work where it's like UGC to a specific type of landing page versus a different style of ad? But just like speak to that relationship in general, since you are so focused to creative. Landing page might not fall into your domain.
It has to, because like at the end of the day, like I mentioned that ROAS is a sexy metric that everybody cares about. That's what they care about. It's not a lever that we can pull, but like if it's not working, then we're not going to be around for very long, because at the end of the day, it's about the results. And we always say we're committed to the results, not the deliverables. So like we've got to have that problem solving mentality. So certainly, often are making recommendations based on what we're seeing on the landing page. We're not always the ones to execute that, but we'll say, here's a framework and some missing opportunity areas that you need to focus on. They're going to help conversion, and then work with them to kind of measure that conversion rate and kind of make recommendations on a monthly basis to incrementally improve that. We like the story brand framework for a landing page. So there's a certain framework that we'll recommend and say, okay, this page here doesn't have any social proof. Like you guys need to have some social proof. And so it's also good practice to have, the creative that you see top of funnel translate back to the landing page. So if you've got a creator that's doing UGC, an easy way to implement that social proof on the landing page is to either, one thing we'll do like a creator montage, like almost like a brand sizzle that's on the page. It's like almost like a little testimonial spotlight. You could even work with a creator to develop that, like more process related to your product if you want. Or you can pull quotes from their content and put a little like image from their Instagram and have it be more of a testimonial. And a lot of times it's all of the above. But certainly you would want to at least house in some format that UGC content on the landing page itself.
Love it. Okay. The final question that I have for you is we've talked a ton about the different steps needed to produce the creative and everything else involved. But what I'm curious about is from an audience perspective, we have all different types of people. We have media buyers, we have UGC creators, we have editors, everyone in between, right? And a lot of people are going to be like, where do I put my hand up? Or like, how do I contribute to this process? So Micah, I'm wondering on your end and how you view the world, Who owns specific stages of like this UGC process that you've talked to us about today?
Yeah. So I think it's taking a step back. Creative strategy is really just like a system or steps you take to ensure long-term growth. It's not like really a role or a person or a brief or whatever. It's a system. So like taking it step by step is important. It's driven by a creative strategist. So this is the through line between all the roles. It's the person who owns the process and owns the results. So the person who's responsible for kind of setting that up on the front end and then kind of corralling the team. Whether you're an agency or a brand, I think having we call it a performance pod, but a team of multiple actors, multiple different expertise and lenses and skill sets that have dedicated time and focus towards this goal of delivering the result that has autonomy and the ability to make decisions and develop the creative to support that is important. So with working in an agency, we give that to our clients. We set you a performance pod that's got a creative strategist. Oftentimes, depending on the skill set of the creative strategist, maybe a copywriter, a video editor, a project manager or account person, and then an influencer manager. That's kind of the main pieces of a UGC pod. So if you're looking to hire, like it's an easy way to work with an agency to kind of implement that pod without having to grow your head count by 5 or 6. Especially if it's a kind of a test with that you're trying to run. But if it's internal, I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the call, like getting the creative that's driven by performance metrics from an internal brand team that's got a massive amount of other creative to develop that doesn't necessarily march to the same KPIs can be really tough. And on the growth side, they don't have the creative muscle and the ability to execute that. So establishing an entrepreneurial pod in a sense where you're pulling people from different teams and dedicating an amount of their time and their focus towards this effort is the best way to kind of go about building that.
And I tend to agree, even like with my view of the world, right? Like I very much view it as the through line being creative strategy and creative strategists, like you had mentioned. But ultimately, there can be specific owners at different stages. Like launching ads live is going to be a media buyer at the end of the day. But then that same media buyer could decide to put their hat, like their creative strategy hat on and say like, hey, let me build a persona out. Let me think of some different ideas. It doesn't have to necessarily be contained. But like Micah had mentioned, like there's so many different types of roles that can fill this piece. It's just like a flex at the same time. Micah has a hat on. I actually put one on today too, just talking about like the role you're playing in this very moment.
Yeah. And working together. So like, creative strategists could audit the past creative and look at industry stuff and probably get a good baseline. But we're oftentimes working directly with the media buyer to figure out, okay, they want to test a new audience. What is this demographic? What concepts can be developed specifically for this audience? And what is the testing framework and the account structure that's best set to support that? And you really can't develop that in a silo. Like you've got to do that in tandem. And so whether you're working with an agency partner who's a media buying agency or an internal growth team, like you've got to kind of work as a part of the same group, which is why that dedicated performance pod, like you need to establish that.
I can see how important you take communication, in all honesty. Like it speaks to your briefs, it speaks to the relationship style approach with your UGC creators, and it speaks to the internal side of things too. How's everybody working in unison on said tasks in order to achieve your common goals? Like you said, the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. So we've come to the end of the show today. Micah, it has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing insights onto like the entire process from your research to your sourcing, to the creation, to the incentivizing, everything in between. Everybody, can we jump into the chat, making sure you're responding to everyone and just show some love really quick, whether it be a thank you or an emoji. Well, Micah, this has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Likewise, it's been a lot of fun. I hope we can do this again. I'm seeing template requests in here, so we'll make sure to follow up on that one. Happy to do that. And, looking to add value to this community too. So feel free to reach out, email or whatever, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm happy to help in any way that we can.
I love it. I love it. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your days, your nights, your afternoons, your mornings, wherever you're dialing in from. And Micah, once again, really appreciate you. And thanks for doing this with us. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
See ya.